What if your relentless desire to improve isn't strength? What if it's despair dressed in ambition, that hunger to optimize, to evolve, to climb one more step on that invisible staircase? Maybe it was never about reaching the top. Maybe it was just about escaping what's at the bottom. You, the self you've been avoiding, the silence you no longer trust. It starts subtly. A new goal, a new book, a new system of morning rituals. You convince yourself it's growth, that it's noble. But slowly, without noticing, you stop being a person and become a project. Everything becomes about version 2.0, the better you, the future you, the one who doesn't feel this lost, this weak, this haunted. But here's the fracture. The higher you climb, the more you forget why you started, and the more you forget who you were before you began to run. It's like standing on an endless staircase. Every step forward, a step further from yourself. And no one told you this, that some stairs don't lead upward. Some just loop in beautiful spirals of distraction, activity, dopamine, deadlines, all built to protect you from having to ask the one question that can't be answered with discipline or hustle. Do I even want to evolve? Or do I just want to stop hating who I am? There is a kind of progress that isn't growth, it's exile. You smile when they say you're doing great, but inside it feels hollow because you know the truth. You know the upgrades haven't made you whole, they've made you tolerable, efficient, admirable maybe, but still unknown, even to yourself. Nietzsche once wrote, "The man who does not want to know himself seeks to improve only to escape himself." And what if that's you? What if your obsession with being better is actually the most elegant disguise of your fear of being, of stopping, of sitting with the unedited version of your soul? No filters, no targets, no progress bar. Of letting yourself be not fixed, not enhanced, just be. And maybe that's why you feel so tired, not because you've failed, but because even your success has become a cage. Because at some point you stopped evolving as a human and started upgrading as an illusion, and you didn't even notice until now. The hunger to improve is born from self-disgust. You call it self-development. You decorate it with highlighters, bullet journals, 5-year plans. But beneath the polished surface, it trembles, not from vision, but from rejection. Because what you're really doing is trying to escape the person you can't bear to meet in the mirror. You read because silence feels like a trap. You chase new techniques because standing still makes the void louder. You become a collector of methods, a disciple of routines, not because you're curious, but because you're desperate. Desperate to outrun that cold, familiar feeling, I am not enough. But here's the brutal paradox. You don't want to evolve. You want to disappear into a version of yourself you can finally tolerate. And in doing so, you lose the chance to truly meet yourself. You become emotionally fluent in pretending. Every goal becomes a drug, every self-help ritual a soft anesthesia. You call it productivity, you call it growth, but your heart knows it's panic. Panic disguised as progress, a way to numb the constant whisper, you're still not lovable. Not like this. It's not the goals that are wrong, it's the motive behind them. You're not building a life, you're building a mask. A beautiful one, perhaps, one that wins applause, one that looks stable from the outside, but it wasn't born from peace. It was born from self-aversion, and that's the fracture no one talks about, because even when you reach a milestone, it feels empty. Even when you improve, you still feel like an intruder inside your own life. Because the one celebrating that progress isn't you. It's the persona you've trained to survive your own judgment. Improving has become your alibi. An elegant way to say, I'm not okay, but at least I'm trying. But trying, without knowing what you're running from, only deepens the exile. And maybe it's time to ask the real question, what if the version of you that's struggling isn't broken? What if the pain isn't proof of failure, but the echo of something deeper trying to be seen? You don't hate who you are because you're flawed. You hate who you are because no one ever taught you how to hold your truth with love, so you chase goals instead, because it's easier to improve than it is to accept. When you no longer know who is evolving, there comes a moment, subtle, invisible, when you stop asking why you want to improve. Why this version of you must be overwritten. Why you're so desperate to become someone else. You don't notice it at first. Improvement becomes mechanical. You follow the next step, the next protocol, the next optimization, and without realizing it, you stop evolving as yourself. You start evolving as a symbol, a template, an idea of who you should be, not who you are. And then it happens. You wake up and can't quite remember what you love. Not really. You forget what made you feel alive before all the performance, before your inner world was colonized by metrics and timelines and curated aesthetics. You don't know who's improving anymore. Is it you, or the version of you that was built to be admired? Somewhere along the path, your ideal self, that constructed persona made of shoulds and borrowed dreams, took the lead. And the real you, the one with contradictions and shadows and childhood echoes, was pushed out of the frame. You think you've grown, but what you call progress might just be assimilation. You've become an edited version of yourself, smoother, more efficient, easier to understand, but also emptier, because the more you curate yourself for the world, the more you vanish from your own inner space. This is the paradox of self-improvement in a world obsessed with appearance. You think you're becoming whole, but you're just becoming acceptable. And when that happens, the deepest part of you, the one that's raw and silent and unrepeatable, begins to feel like a threat, like something that could ruin the performance. So you exile it, and then you call that exile growth. But growth without self-recognition is just compliance. It's survival in disguise, and maybe that's why nothing ever feels enough, because you're not evolving into your truth. You're just adapting to survive the eyes of others. When exhaustion is not from doing, but from fleeing, you tell yourself you're just tired, that life is fast, work is endless, the world demands too much. But deep down, the fatigue feels older, heavier. It doesn't begin in your calendar. It begins in your chest, because what drains you isn't what you do, it's what you avoid. You stay busy, not because you have too much to handle, but because the silence scares you. Because in silence, things start to surface. Memories you buried, feelings you postponed, questions that have no clear answers, so you run. You run through checklists and inboxes and self-improvement rituals. You run through the gym, through podcasts, through another online course that promises clarity. But it's not clarity you're chasing, it's anesthesia, because when you stop, you feel. And what you feel isn't comfortable. It's the echo of years spent pretending to be okay. It's the ache of a self you've forgotten how to hear. A hyperactive mind often hides a heart that's too tired to scream. You've mistaken emotional avoidance for discipline. You've called it resilience, when it was actually resistance, not against the world, but against your own truth. And the truth is this: you are not tired because of how much you do. You are tired because of how little of it is real. You've built a fortress of productivity to shield yourself from presence, from stillness, from the raw honesty that lives in doing nothing, saying nothing, just being. But there's a cost to this performance. And it's not burnout, it's disconnection. You forget the last time you felt joy that wasn't strategic, peace that wasn't scheduled, connection that wasn't transactional. You become efficient in your escape. You achieve everything except yourself. And so your body collapses in ways your mind won't admit. Not because you're weak, but because you've asked your soul to carry the weight of your absence. That weight is not from work, it's from pretending. And maybe that's why the more you do, the less you feel, because you've mastered the art of movement, but forgotten how to stay. When discipline becomes another form of disappearance, you call it control. You wake up at the same time, you follow the same routine, you track your habits with military precision. And somewhere in that ritual, you begin to feel powerful, like you're finally mastering life. But beneath the surface, something starts to hollow out. Discipline, once your anchor, becomes a disguise, not for strength, but for fear. The fear that without it, everything would collapse, that you would collapse. And maybe you would, because your discipline was never built on peace. It was built on self-rejection. You don't follow those systems to express who you are. You follow them to escape who you are, to keep yourself on a leash, to contain the parts of you that still feel chaotic, still feel emotional, still feel unwanted. You call it focus, but it's perfectionism with better branding. You've trained yourself to be efficient in a direction you never chose. You optimize yourself into obedience. You celebrate control, not noticing that it's costing you something sacred, the right to feel lost, the right to feel human, the right to fall apart without assigning it as failure. Discipline without introspection becomes self-denial. You silence your needs, you suppress your instincts, you shame your softness, and then you call it growth. But growth that amputates your truth isn't growth. It's self-abandonment with a productivity badge. You don't want to master yourself, not really. You want to erase the parts of you that still hurt, the parts you were told are wrong, the anger, the sensitivity, the ache to rest, the hunger to be loved without performing. And in this war against yourself, you become both the commander and the captive. You stand tall, you stay consistent, you look successful, but inside, you're vanishing. Because it's not discipline you're practicing, it's disappearance, ritualized, rewarded, and slowly irreversible. When your need to improve is just a cry to be allowed, you don't say it out loud. But deep down, you carry a quiet, devastating belief that you are a mistake in need of correction. And so you build, you refine, you discipline, you improve, not out of joy, not even out of hope, but out of fear that if you don't become something better, no one will ever stay. No one will ever see you as enough. You don't remember when it began. Maybe it wasn't even spoken. Maybe it was just a glance, a silence, a parent who praised your achievements more than your presence, a world that only celebrated your usefulness. But something lodged itself into your bones, that love must be earned, and since then, every step you take toward becoming better is really a step away from that unbearable feeling, the feeling that you, as you are, could never be accepted. So you wear the mask of improvement, you gather titles, build habits, recite mantras about strength and progress. But inside, the question never stops pulsing. Am I lovable yet? And the answer always seems one more achievement away. This is the wound of inadequacy, invisible, persistent, alive. It whispers that you are only as worthy as your last reinvention. That rest is laziness. That stillness is dangerous, that if you're not becoming something greater, you are nothing at all. And so you live in the performance of transformation. But what if it's never been transformation? What if it's just bargaining with the ghosts of childhood, bargaining with a world that made you believe your existence needed justification? You don't really want to change. You want to be accepted for what you were never allowed to be. That's the secret most won't admit. Improvement isn't always desire. Sometimes it's a scream that says, "See me, hold me, let me exist," without having to earn it. Abil, but until that scream is heard, you'll keep sculpting yourself into silence, hoping the world applauds loud enough to drown out the pain. When running from yourself feels safer than being free, did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You move, you build, you change, you evolve, but you never stop, because if you stop, you'll feel. And if you feel, truly feel, the whole structure might collapse. That's the secret terror. Not failure, not stagnation, but collapse. The symbolic death of everything you've built. to survive. You fear stillness because in stillness, the old self returns. The one you've buried under years of progress. The one that still holds pain you've never digested. The one that remembers what it was like to be unseen, unheard, untouched by compassion. So you keep going. You call it momentum, you call it drive. But deep down, it's an escape. From the moment where your identity unravels and nothing remains but the raw, unfinished truth of who you are. And that moment is the beginning of real growth. But real growth doesn't look like a trophy. It looks like letting go of the persona you perfected to avoid the collapse. It looks like dying, not physically, but symbolically. Letting the false self disintegrate, the one that knows how to succeed, how to be loved, how to be efficient, but doesn't know how to be free. That self cannot be fixed. It must be surrendered. And that's terrifying, because we've been taught that collapse is failure. That undoing means we wasted time. That slowing down means we're giving up. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe real rebirth begins with a collapse we didn't plan for. Maybe the silence you avoid isn't a threat, but a doorway. And maybe what you think is evolution is just resistance dressed in effort. You can't reach truth through speed. You can only reach it through the courage to stop pretending that running is the same as becoming. And that's the hardest revolution of all. To unlearn everything that made you feel safe and walk into yourself unarmed. What would remain of you if nothing needed to improve? Strip it all away. No projects, no goals, no future self to chase, no progress bar to fill, just you, in a room, in silence. Would that feel like peace or panic? It's a question most avoid, because it forces you to confront the truth that so much of your identity has been built around effort, around becoming, around fixing what someone, somewhere, once made you believe was wrong with you. But what if there was nothing left to fix? What if improvement was no longer an option? Who would you be then? Would you vanish without the weight of becoming? Would your days feel hollow without a crisis to solve? There is a deeper terror hiding beneath the hunger to grow, the terror of discovering that your self-worth was never rooted in being, but in being useful. Useful to others, useful to systems, useful to the version of you that learned how to earn affection, not receive it freely. So you keep upgrading, not because you're broken, but because usefulness has become your currency, your mask, your safety. But usefulness is not the same as wholeness. And the more you invest in proving your worth through performance, the more distant you become from your essence. This is the existential test few ever name. If your identity depends on what you're fixing, can you exist when everything is still? Not achieve, not inspire, not evolve, just exist. To sit inside your own presence without flinching. To let your breath, not your productivity, define your value. To feel your heart beating and trust that it's enough. Real evolution might not begin with doing more. It might begin the moment you stop trying to fix yourself like a broken object and start listening to the self that never needed repair. Only recognition, only room to breathe, only the right to be, without condition. The obsession with becoming better was never about freedom. You tried. You tried with books, with routines, with promises made in the quiet of night. You tried with every fiber of your mind, not because you were lazy, but because something inside was screaming for peace. But no matter how many layers you added, no matter how sculpted your identity became, something remained untouched. Something stayed hollow, because your obsession with improvement didn't come from your light. It came from your wound. And wounds don't heal through decoration. They only heal when they're seen. You didn't improve to grow. You improved to survive the feeling that you were never enough to begin with. That if you didn't evolve fast enough, smart enough, beautifully enough, you'd vanish in the silence of your own irrelevance. But in chasing that future self, you forgot how to feel the one already here. You replaced presence with progress, You became a symbol of effort instead of a home for truth, and in that process, something sacred was lost, the ability to feel without needing to fix, the permission to fall apart without branding it as failure, the right to suffer without rushing to transform the pain into wisdom before it's even fully named. You tried so hard to improve, you forgot how to feel. And now, even your growth feels like a prison, a performance, a loop, aesthetic, impressive, but void of oxygen, because you are not the self that always needs fixing. You are not the project. You are not the strategy. You are not the version of you that's been rehearsed into existence. You are the one underneath, the one before the edits. The one who aches for stillness, not because you're done, but because you were never truly allowed to begin. Nietzsche whispered, "Become who you are." But how can you, if all you've ever done is try to become someone else? Maybe the beginning was never about building. Maybe it was always about ending the performance, ending the chase, ending the quiet violence of believing you must always be more to deserve your own breath. You're not broken. You're just exhausted from pretending you need to be fixed. And yes, and there's still time to stop, not to give up, not to disappear, but to finally exist.